I am making this video to raise awareness of the second Reptilicus patch, a patch that, if implemented by Creative Assembly, will probably be the last unit balance focused patch before Attila is released. Some of this will be directly from the Reptilicus' thread, and it will provide a framework for what I talk about in the video, and some of the ideas will be my own, and some of them will be from members of the community. But I won't go through every proposed change on the thread. You guys can go to the Total War forums to see the thread in its entirety, but just the ones that I think are important or will dramatically improve Rome 2 will be the ones that I focus on in this video. Thanks again to Reptilicus and all those other members of the community who have put in time, effort, and energy to get this patch implemented. Hopefully CA will listen, because I think there are a lot of really good ideas in the coming video and in Reptilicus' patch. So, we've seen the game go through a multitude of patches, and it's slowly approaching the end of its natural lifespan, like a deer in the headlights. It'll get struck by the speeding 69 Chevrolet that is Attila, so why not make the last glory days of our deer game truly glorious? AKA, fix the stuff that needs fixing. Some patches brought massive overhauls to the game, the latest being patch 16, also known as the Reptilicus patch. A lot of things that have been changed for the better, and the feedback from a lot of you before and after the patch was released was awesome. Some things of high priority were not implemented, while some low priority things were implemented, and some new issues swam up to the surface, and it's time to fix those issues and bring the game's transition from patch 14 to 15, the Emperor Edition, and get it all sorted out. I've received input from a lot of players for this thread, such as Indie Pride, Best Pride, Milk Cookies, Best Cookies, Donko, Desert Fox, Jonasney, Trolley Bully, and a lot more. So here are a list of general changes to mechanics that should be implemented. Okay, one of the big ones that I think that this game really needs right now is that Cavalry in general, melee Cavalry specifically, needs their anti-infantry bonus back. Spear Cavalry should get a hidden +5 while keeping the bonus first large, and Sword Cavalry should get a +10 bonus. A lot of players have been very unsatisfied with melee Cavalry post-patch 15 in general. Elite melee Cavalry is very useless in many ways, while simple mid-tier cav can get shut down completely by well-used cheap units, such as the very humble Lebby Freeman. Sword Cavalry basically lost its specialization, and it needs it back really badly. Spear Cav completely outperforms them in proper cavalry fights, and even they can honestly get shut down pretty easily by infantry. We never see Aspis Companion Cavalry anymore, or Mercenary Companions, or Azat Knights, because they cost way too much for what they do and simply don't do enough in melee combat. To be viable in multiplayer, they need to perform like Katana Cavalry did in Shogun 2, a specialized unit that shreds enemy infantry in melee but can be countered by spear-armed cavalry or spears on the ground. Countering the infantry spam basically the sword spam meta, will become much less of a bore if we get Katana Cavalry back in Rome 2, due to the bonus versus infantry, and it will allow Cav to be used in a much more aggressive fashion, besides charging and disrupting and basically generic purposes that it's used for now, blunting the charge bonuses of Barbarian infantry. Another thing that's not on the thread, but I think really needs to get implemented into Rome 2, is the guard mode. And if it isn't going to be implemented into Rome 2, it needs to be put into Attila. Cavalry on this patch is pretty ridiculously sticky in a lot of cases, and while I completely agree that pulling through a deep formation of infantry should be difficult or impossible without tremendous losses for cavalry, I often see literally an entire unit stop after one man gets caught on the end of the unit and engaged in melee. Like, the entire cavalry will just stop mid-charge to deal with the threat dealt to the one person on the flank, and it breaks immersion to see an entire unit stop their charge just because one guy got engaged. It's stupid. It's bad gameplay balance, and it's something that needs to get fixed. So, if guard mode got implemented, then cavalry could have one or two or a couple guys on the end get engaged, and then the rest of the unit would still keep going forward, use their momentum, and charge into whatever they are charging into. I think this is a very important thing to change in Rome 2, and I know that it hasn't been like this the entire time of the game's life cycle, so I think it needs to get changed. One thing that I think is going to be really important for the game that needs to happen is to remove the bonus versus large from melee and spear infantry javelins. And a lot of the crap and mid-tier units that use javelins right now that have fire at will need to lose those jabs. So with the Emperor Edition, we've seen fire at will implemented for infantry with javelins, Most of the time, even simple units such as Spear Livy can completely counter elephants or do horrendous damage to cavalry of great quality, even before the battle truly begins. Crap tier units slinging javelins with fire at will is actually detrimental to the game because it prevents frontal charges from units like cataphracts and very heavy melee and shock cavalry, which can be absorbed by a crap unit, but they'll still do a ridiculous amount of HP damage due to javelins having a bonus versus large. It's actually one of the reasons that Barbarians in general are so strong on this meta, is that they have a ton of cheap and mid-tier swords with high armor that can cause a lot of HP damage with their javelins on fire at will once heavy cavalry tries to charge in. And after they lose a lot of HP, cavalry gets whittled down very, very quickly. Peltas should maintain their bonus versus cavalry on their javelins, in my opinion, and dedicated javelin sword hybrids like Iberian Swordsman, all Roman legionary infantry, all of those kind of units should maintain their jabs, but units like Levy Freemen, Celtic warriors, other low-tier units across the board need to lose their fire at will and simply not have javelins at all. Basically, removing the bonus from non-dedicated skirmisher javelins makes them less of an extreme counter to mounted units, while still allowing them to be multi-purpose. So from that standpoint, it's talking about like Thoreo spears and that kind of thing. That they won't have the bonus versus large, but normal skirmisher, dedicated skirmisher javelins will still have their bonus versus large. Right now, I think Levy Freemen are OP. They are too multi-purpose in terms of meat shielding, screening, killing cavalry, and having fire at will for their cost. They are a ridiculously cheap investment for what they can do. They make higher tier spears for barbarian factions obsolete. There's no point in bringing veteran spears or any of the mid-tier ones really, because Levy Freemen are so good. And it's also a big reason that they're OP right now is that cavalry in general is not as strong as I think it should be. And hopefully that will change. A big issue on EE Emperor Edition right now is the morale spikes, and I think that fear effects in general need to get a pretty big buff. Manipulating morale on units is too difficult in Emperor Edition at the moment. I've always been opposed to the mass routes that so often accompanied Shogun 2 battles. Basically, you'd get into melee combat and then everything would rout 5 seconds later. And I don't really like that, although, to be honest, a lot of that was due to the fact that there were ridiculous melee attack values in that upgrade system. But I also think that units are lasting in melee combat for too long on EE, and I think a lot of that is due to morale being very weird. Like, you'll often see Levy Freeman confident at 10 men and wavering for over a minute but never actually shattering. Evocati confident with like 3 men left in the unit in the entire like 120, 160 man unit. Pretty ridiculous, and that's been happening pretty much since Emperor Edition was released. So morale has basically just been performing awkwardly at times, leading to some fights being completely broken. Crap tier units with 35 morale should not be surviving hammer and anvils. They should get hit and then shatter. If you have such low morale, you should shatter. You shouldn't be wavering for over a minute. On Scare, and I think this is very important, before patch 15, Scare would be a complete game changer when used correctly, and now you don't even feel it. You can completely ignore Scare effects unless the entire enemy army is composed of like Eastern Spearmen or really low tier units. And units such as camels, camel cataphracts, the other camel units have completely lost their purpose because bringing a camel unit in a cav fight doesn't cause cavalry units to rout. The Scare just isn't there. It's a good thing that Scare is not overpowered like it used to be. I don't remember what patch it was, maybe patch 14 or 13 or 15, I don't even know. I think 14 is what it was. Like, you could completely mass route Evocati builds from Rome when they're all full strength like Suebi rush armies. And it's good that it's not like that, but it's also a bad thing when a game mechanic serves a barely noticeable or insignificant purpose, and right now that's what Scare is. You can't really stack Scare effects and get very tangible results. It happens occasionally, you'll see it, but for the most part, it doesn't work that well, and I think it's because a lot of the low-tier units survive and don't rout for a very long time, and it needs to change. I think that's definitely true, and Fear in general needs to be more potent. Make it pinch. Scare needs a buff. That's the ultimate part of that. Shock cavalry units in general, I think they need trample back. I think the elite shock cavalry units should all have it. Basically, shock cavalry took the biggest hit from CA's decision to get rid of a lot of the unit abilities. Like, we know that Levy Freeman they don't have cav counter tactics anymore, and a lot of the mid-tier and high-tier units don't have their abilities anymore, but I think they definitely need that back. I don't think there's any question. It basically made it so that cataphracts are the only elite cavalry truly worth bringing now. Yeah, you can bring some others, but I mean, trample is big for shot cavalry, for Ptolemaic cavalry, for all those. They need that back to really be viable again, in my opinion. And as we all know, shot cavalry is basically too easy to shut down before they do too much damage. A bunch of infantry units, cheap ones, can absorb the charge, throw their jabs, and then they don't really do that much damage at all. Pikes in general need a price reduction. I don't think there's any doubt about this at all. They do not really fulfill their purpose. They all need one. Like, elite pikes especially, they need the biggest price decrease because no one brings elite pikes. I can't remember the last time that I saw Hellenic Royal Guard or foot companions on a battle. It doesn't happen. They're just not cost effective. They're not worth what they're able to do in melee combat. So pikes need some love, and I think a pretty easy way to do it would just be to drastically reduce the cost of elite pikes. Probably do a mid-tier price cut for the mid pikes, and then for like levy pikemen, very small price cut. And I think that would probably give them a decent buff. I mean, they're kind of a broken unit in many ways anyway, but I think a price reduction would be pretty good. I just don't think there's a single elite pike unit in the game that's worth over 1,000 talents, so take that for what it's worth. Price reduction for Hellenic sword units, no question. I think this is something that needs to happen. They often just get outperformed by a lot of other sword units in the game. Royal Peltas get beaten by Evocati cohort, or well-used Galatian Legionnaires, for example. Royal Thorax Swordsman and Silver Shield Swordsman are atrociously bad, and they need a price decrease or a substantial buff to move them more in line with Barbarian infantry in melee combat. I'm not saying they have to beat Oathsworn one-on-one in melee, because they probably shouldn't if we're talking about game balance and what the tools each faction has, but they need to be better than what they do. There's no question about it. They're just too expensive right now. Ambusher units in general, I think this is not a big deal, but right now I really think they need a price reduction and probably to have 80 range javelins and be able to target units. They're quite weak and just kind of a troll unit at the moment, and they generally just lack armor and have mediocre melee stats. So adding javelins, I think, would make them a lot more viable. Britain ambushers, I think, are the only ambush unit in the game right now that has javelins that you can target. And so I think that would be a good buff to all ambushers in the game, make them at least a little bit more viable. So now we're going to go into some faction-specific buffs and changes. And we'll start with Bactria. I think that makes some sense. The elite Persian archers across the board for Armenia, Parthia, any faction that has elite Persian archers, they should have 40 bow damage. I believe right now it's 35 or 37 or something. It's lower than Cretan archers and other units, and they're elite Persian archers. Like, they're high tier, but somehow have less bow damage than Parthian foot archers. That makes no sense. They're elite. They should do way more than they do right now. So upping their bow damage would be good, and then that would make their bonus versus cavalry much more important, and their melee stats much more important, I think, making them a good bow unit. Increase the armor, morale, and HPO scale thorax hoplites by 5 to 80, 60, and 60 respectively. Bactria really does need it. They don't really have a great unit to use as a anvil for the hammering from their cataphracts and from their other cavalry units. They need a unit that has effective holding power, and right now the scale thorax hoplites, especially for being a unique unit, are just not very strong. So I think those buffs would be nice for them. Hellenic cataphracts need a price reduction, no question. They cost a lot right now, but they don't perform as well as their price indicates. And I'm not talking about a huge price reduction, but they need one. They need something. And I don't think that would really make Bactria overpowered with a change like that, but it would definitely be helpful for them, there's no question. And I think for Seleucids and the other units, or other factions that have Hellenic cataphracts, those should get price decreases as well. Cimmeria is a big one. I don't actually have the Black Seas DLC, but I think Cimmeria is one, and when I saw their unit roster when it first came out, I was like, they need a change. And the change right now is that they need a mid-tier or high-tier nomadic cavalry unit. Right now, they simply don't have any cavalry. I mean, they have the steppe horseman, like the 350 talent shot cav that's absolutely atrocious, and it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you look at what Cimmeria does as a faction, they are a pure skirmish and spear faction. They have the spear hoplite, like high tier elite nobles that are more like mid tier hoplites, to hold the line, and then they have skirmishing. They have the heavy archers and the peltasts. They need to have cavalry units that can kill things in melee combat, and there's no question that a trying to forget a step armored lancer or a step noble lancer, like one of those units, a nomadic cavalry unit would do so much for them. They need it because they need something to hammer and anvil with, and right now the 350 talent shot cav is not doing it for them. They're too easy to counter because they don't have any good cavalry. Moving on, I think that to Carthage. Carthage needs a mercenary cap increase. I think that would be pretty important. I mean, they were known historically for having and utilizing lots of different mercenaries from Africa and Iberia. So I think that while there are certain caps for every faction in the game, I think that should be one-upped with every unit that they have that's a mercenary. So a companion should be capped at 3 instead of 2. Samurai should be capped at 4 instead of 3, that kind of thing. I think that'd be a really good idea for them and make it kind of interesting. Samurai warriors are a tanky sword unit that really needs shield wall. They don't have it right now for some reason, but the whole point of that unit is to tank infantry engagements for a while, and they don't have it. So shield wall for them I think would be pretty important, and without it I think a lot of infantry units kind of just beat up on them faster than they should. For some reason right now, African war elephants actually have lower mass than regular elephants, which is bad. That needs to get changed. I'm sure that was a mistake from CA, but that needs to get fixed for sure. Moving on to Epirus and Macedon, Thessalian cavalry should be moved from heavy to very heavy shot cavalry. They are actually a really good unit, and I bring them in my Epirus and Macedonian builds all the time. They're kind of the cavalry you need to bring, but they do have a little bit too low mass, and they suffer because of it. Their charges aren't quite as potent as maybe they should be, and I think they should just get moved to very heavy and just have a little bit more mass. So Barbarians, this is a big thing. We know that the sword spams in general are the meta right now. So there are some general changes to Barbarians that are proposed by Reptilicus and other members of the community. There should be a reduction in price of the mid-tier spears, the chosen spears, the veteran spears, those kind of things. I don't think there's any question that right now there's no role for them in Barbarian armies, because even though they have very decent stats and very good holding capability and defensive potential, there's really no reason for you to bring them because you can bring a bunch of cheap sword units. So when Cav hopefully gets buffed, there'd be more of a role for that. So if you just decrease their price a little bit, they'd be even more viable and you'd see them a lot more, and it wouldn't just be the sword spams. And I think naked units in general probably do need a price reduction. Like, they're good, they can be very good, but they're also really easy to counter. And I think 490 talents, 480 talents for a naked warrior may be a little bit too much, considering how devastated they can get by skirmishing or cavalry charges or even getting charged by another melee unit. They're really not worth that much. So naked units in general should probably be reduced a little bit. Moving on to RDA and the Illyrians. This is not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen, but it would be great if there could be a new Sika unit. I think that'd be really cool. Like a mid-tier, low-armored Sika unit that kind of does the killing while the hoplites hold the line. I think it would fit really well with what RDA does as a faction. They have a bunch of really heavily armored spears, 115 armored spears with the noble hoplites, but nothing to do a lot of killing. And I think the killing could come from a Sika unit like this that you would try to get rear charges with. I think that'd be pretty cool. Moving on, Folksman and Ramphia units should probably have a bonus, more of a bonus, +5 bonus to infantry. They simply aren't as strong as they used to be. And I think that they should be able to shred infantry units in general, and I think a bonus versus infantry would be good for them. Moving on to Iceni, there's no question the massive chariots needs to get buffed a little bit. For Iceni chariots, I'm not talking about scythe chariots. They are different. CA seems to treat them as the same. Iceni chariots and scythe chariots are not the same thing. So Iceni chariots should get better mass, more HP, maybe 10 more HP, and 10 more armor to 180 respectively. And they keep getting nerfed along with side chariots, and it's just dumb because they're not the same thing. So they do need those buffs, there's no question. And for Iceni as well, heroic nobles should get 5 points to their armor, so that goes up to 80. 6 to their charge, so it goes up to 38, and 2 melee attack to 45. I think that's important because I have noticed, and Reptilicus has noticed, and other people, they just get beaten up by a lot of the other barbarian nobles, and Iceni in general is not as good as other barbarians on this patch. They just lose to a lot of different elite tier barbarian infantry, so they need a buff. Like they should be more in line with the Oathsworn, more in line with the Swordmasters for the Suebi. And the chariots don't justify the poorness, the weakness of the rest of the Iceni roster. So they do need some love. There's no question. I don't see them ever get played in tournaments or anything. And they're like the only barbarian faction besides maybe Nervii that I don't get seen played very often. For Nervii and Suebi, the mass of Mighty Horse should be should be moved to Heavy Cavalry. Why they're not there already doesn't make any sense. They're much like a lot of other barbarian cavalry, like Heavy Horse. They should be Heavy Cavalry. And the Riders of the Hunt for Suebi and Noble Cavalry for Suebi should get their mass increased as well to the next rank up, because they are a little bit too low. They get beaten up a little bit too much, and their charges in general aren't quite as good as they maybe should be, if we compare them to like Heavy Horse of the Arverni and stuff like that. Tylus and Galatia, the meta factions. I think there should be a price increase for Tribal Warriors and Galatian Legionnaires. Reptilicus probably might not agree with the Galatian Legionnaires, but I think they definitely need it. Need a price increase. We'll talk about Tylus first, though. For the Tribal Warriors, they cost too little for what they can do in melee combat. I mean, they're beasts. Like, you pick Tylus for Tribal Warriors, so they can't really afford to get nerfed stat-wise, because then you won't bring Tylus anymore. But they should get their price increase maybe to 800. So that would be... well, they're like 730 talents now, so that'd be like 70 each. That would make it a little bit harder to round out the faction a little bit, but it would still make, their Tribal Warriors would still be the exact same unit, still very powerful in melee. And for Galatia, really glad they got Mercenary Syrian Archers, really glad they got Cappadocian Cavalry, but they have a bunch of tools that other barbarian factions don't have with those units. And their mid-tier sword, the Galatian Legionnaire, is the best one in the entire game. They beat Tribal Warriors, they beat like every other mid-tier sword unit in the game, except maybe Roman ones, but even then I think they do really well versus Roman swords as well. So, and again, like I said, they have Noble Horse, they have Cappadocian Cavalry, they have Mercenary Syrian Archers. So, they deserve a price increase to probably 850. Maybe even higher than that, maybe a little bit higher. But 850 is decent, and it would help make it a little bit harder to round out their builds. Moving on to Eastern factions. For Parthia, Camel Cataphracts deserve the Discipline trait. There's really no Cataphract unit in the game that shouldn't have it. They're Cataphracts. They're going to be disciplined. They deserve to have it. Pontus, the price for naked swords needs to get fixed. They were at 380 talents. They should be more like 480, like every other naked sword unit in the game. And then I suggested earlier they get a price decrease a little bit, so maybe to 450 or 430 or something. But they do cost too little right now for Pontus when everything else in the game is 100 talents more than them. So that was just a mistake from CA that needs to get fixed. Just taking a little bit of water. Pontic Swordsman should get a little bit of a buff for health, morale, and armor. 5 points each to 55 health, 55 morale, 80 armor. They cost 620 talents, but they lose to mid-tier swords that cost even less than that. They're pretty bad right now, honestly. They are pretty bad. So, they shouldn't be elite because Pontus has so many other tools, but they really do need a little bit of a buff because they are very weak at the moment. Moving on to Nomads. I know this is one of Reptilicus' favorite. These factions are awesome, and they really are fun to use, but they definitely need some changes, there's no question. One of the suggestions I really liked for them was that all mid-tier and elite nomadic range units get 3 to 5 extra ammunition. This would make sense. Horse archers in general have very low ammunition and less men in the unit, so they don't cause as much damage with their skirmishing. So if you gave them all maybe 3 ammunition, that would give them more volleys and let them do more damage as the game progresses. I think that would be probably pretty decent. And this would not apply to any other horse archers in the game, not to Parthia, not to Cimmerian, Noble, Armored Archers, any of those. It would only apply to Nomad factions. I am of the belief that Nomads should not get access to foot archers. Some people really want foot archers to get added to the Nomads. I really don't think that's a good idea, because I think we'd see way less cavalry archers for them than we do now. And I think you'd probably see, like, very similar to Parthian and Armenian skirmish builds, where you see, like, foot archer spam or slinger spam, and then maybe only like 2 or 3 horse archers. I think if you gave the Nomads that would be a problem, and we don't really want that, because it would change their compositions too much. So no foot archers, in my opinion, for the Nomads. I think that'd be bad. But I do think that they should get the crap tier step spearmen and step whatever I guess the step spearmen are the only ones. They should get like one really crap tier melee unit that they can use to like meet shield and like put into shield wall and just like hope it survives for like 20 seconds while your cavalry goes around and hammering anvils. Something like that would be nice. But no more than that, I don't think. And then that low tier crap unit would be purely for like meat shielding and holding purposes. They're not reliable at all. And for those who argue that it would like break immersion to give infantry to the Nomads, don't bring them. You don't have to bring them. No one's forcing you to bring them. And they're not good. Like, they should not be good infantry units. So I don't really see the problem with giving them that. For Masagatai, I actually didn't notice this myself, because I haven't played them for a while. Apparently, Saka Cataphracts got nerfed, and that's dumb. Like, that's really stupid, because they should reign supreme. They should be the best cavalry unit in the entire game, no question, hands down. Saka Cataphracts should beat everything, every other cavalry unit 1v1 in melee combat. Apparently, right now, they're only marginally better than Eastern Cataphracts. They get trampled by Hellenic Cataphracts and get destroyed by Royal Cataphracts. So that's bad. If that's true, again, I haven't tested it, but they should honestly do really well versus Royal Cataphracts as well. I mean, they should get beat up, but like have plenty of men left in the unit, because I mean, they are the premier Cataphract unit. They should be the best Cataphract unit, in my opinion. So give them back their insane stats, revert the nerf that shouldn't have happened, and maybe give them a bit of a price increase, maybe 50 or 100 talents, but I don't think any more than that. They are Nomad faction. They're already limited in what they can do, so right now I think they're just too predictable and too easy to counter in multiplayer. So I think these proposed changes would help them out a little bit, especially the ammunition for the horse archers. I think 3 or 5 ammunition for each of those mid and high tier archer units would be very useful for the Nomads. But that's it. There were a bunch of other patch notes, but those were the ones that I wanted to focus on without making the video insanely long. I would like to thank Reptilicus again for providing me the framework with this thread for this video. And you guys should definitely check out the thread in the description below and support it if you agree with a lot of these changes. And then again, thank you to Danko, Desert Fox, Jonas Need, Trolley Bully, Blade Master, and anyone else who contributed in the community. This kind of patch, if it's implemented, could do wonders for the game and certainly make it less stale. Metal right now is very stale and needs another patch before Until it launches, I think. And I very much doubt all this will get put in the game. It's entirely possible none of it will. The patch simply might not come out, which would be unfortunate. But I think this will make multiplayer a lot more fun. So make sure you check out Reptilicus' channel at youtube.com/ReptilicusJungleLair. Link will be in the description below. He does good work for the community and is the best Tyrannosaur EU. So definitely check him out. And with that said, I have run out of breath. Indie Pride, Best Pride, Milk and Cookie, Best Cookie, signing out. Peace.